In order to talk about the history of network television, we first have to talk about the history of network radio. If a station wanted to broadcast, they needed a license from the Federal Radio Commission, which was created in 1926 in order to help regulate radio. During this time, NBC became the first to utilize the network system and created the first permanent coast-to-coast radio station in the nation. They used phone lines to physically connect stations, most of which were privately owned and operated. Soon, other companies began adopting similar systems for broadcasting. Those privately owned radio stations that agreed to broadcast the larger network's programs were called affiliates. When television first came into the mix, stations needed licenses again in order to broadcast. These licenses were generally given to experienced radio broadcasters. This meant that there were many similarities between the growth of radio networks and the growth of television networks. A problem that reared its head almost immediately was the fact that television signals were packed with much more information than radio signals, and could not be transmitted using the technology available at the time, or at least could not be transmitted cost-effectively. This problem was eventually remedied by the invention of the coaxial cable by an AT&T subsidiary. Its original purpose was to improve television communication and allow for over 200 telephone calls to be transmitted at once. They were useful because the coaxial cable can carry very high-frequency signals without many losses. They have also been used for broadband internet and to connect radio transmitters and receivers to their antenna. NBC embraced the technology and began broadcasting some programs to Philadelphia and Schenectady, New York in 1941. But the beginning of World War II brought television expansion to a halt and would not pick back up again until after the end of the war in 1946. After the war, network television really took off, with Dumont leading the way and NBC soon following suit, with a network connecting New York City, Philadelphia, Schenectady, and Washington. Baltimore and Boston were added to those in 1947, and CBS and ABC took up the challenge in 1948. Before we knew it, these networks were able to broadcast coast to coast in only 3 years. Originally, each of the 4 networks only broadcasted for a couple of hours every week, with the rest of the time being put towards locally produced content. But as the network started to increase the amount of programs they were airing, the Federal Communications Commission began to worry that locally produced content might be completely taken over. This led to them instituting the Prime Time Access Rule, which restricted the amount of time that a network could run their program, allowing local content to survive. However, local stations didn't want the burden of producing that many programs and chose instead to produce shows from independent producers, a process known as syndication. After the closing of Dumont in 1956, many tried to make their way into the television network business without much success, until 1986 with the founding of the Fox Broadcasting Company, a network that has climbed the ranks until they finally became the 4th major network in 1994. Today, the show is still run by those 3 major companies that have been there from the start: ABC, CBS, and NBC. After the invention of cable, many new cable-exclusive networks were born, for example HBO, Showtime, and Adult Swim. And with the much more recent explosion of internet use, these and even those larger networks are having to adapt to the changing times, with cable cutting also being at an all-time high.